Charlottesville, Virginia, summer of 2014, a psychology lab at the university. The experiment is simple, almost absurdly so. Participants are led one at a time into a small bare room. No phone, no book, no music, no tasks. They are asked to sit alone with their own thoughts for somewhere between 6 and 15 minutes. That is all. Just sit. Just think. Before the session begins, each participant is given a small device and told, "This button delivers a mild electric shock, not dangerous but unpleasant." During the study, pressing it is entirely optional. There is no reward for pressing it and no penalty for leaving it alone. It is simply available. The researchers, Timothy Wilson and Daniel Gilbert, expected that most people would sit quietly for the allotted time. After all, the task required literally nothing. What happened instead became one of the most discussed findings in social psychology that decade. 67% of male participants and 25% of female participants chose to shock themselves rather than sit in silence with their own thoughts. Some pressed the button multiple times. One participant shocked himself 190 times in 15 minutes. He preferred physical pain, real, measurable electrical pain, to the experience of being alone with his own mind. That result is darkly funny. It is also the most honest piece of data about the modern relationship with silence that exists. The obvious question is, what is the brain so afraid of? And the answer has less to do with fear than with design. Marcus Raichle at Washington University in St. Louis identified something in 2001 that fundamentally changed how neuroscience understands the resting brain. He called it the default mode network, a constellation of brain regions that activate specifically when a person is not focused on any external task, when the noise stops, when the inbox is closed and the podcast ends, when the room goes quiet and the phone is in another room. The default mode network does not produce calm, it produces activity, a very specific kind. Self-referential processing, mental time travel, replaying the past, rehearsing the future, rumination, worry, social simulation, imagining what other people think, replaying conversations, scripting future interactions. The internal monologue that narrates existence and never stops offering its commentary. In short, the moment external stimulation disappears, the brain fills the vacuum with itself. And for most people, the self it encounters in that vacuum is not the serene, centered figure from the meditation advertisements. It is the anxious, unfinished, unsettled version that external noise had been conveniently covering over. That is what the participants in Virginia were avoiding. Not silence, themselves. But the story of silence does not end with avoidance, because the experience of quiet changes depending on how long it lasts, and the changes are neurologically measurable. The first 2 minutes are the worst. Research on meditation practitioners, including experienced ones with thousands of hours of practice, consistently shows that the initial phase of externally imposed quiet is dominated by heightened default mode activity. The brain, suddenly deprived of input, does not slow down. It accelerates its internal production. Thoughts multiply. Discomfort rises. The impulse to reach for a phone, to check something, to produce any kind of external stimulation peaks within the first 90 to 120 seconds. This is the window where most people quit. This is the window where the Virginia participants reached for the shock button. The experience is genuinely unpleasant, not because silence is harmful, but because the brain is recalibrating. Shifting from externally directed attention to internally directed attention is a neurological transition, and like most transitions, it begins with turbulence. 2 minutes feels like 10. That is not a metaphor. Time perception research shows that during periods of low external stimulation, subjective time expands. 60 seconds of silence is experienced as significantly longer than 60 seconds of engagement. The brain, accustomed to the rhythm of input-response, loses its temporal anchor. And without that anchor, each second stretches. This is why just 5 minutes of quiet sounds easy and feels like an ordeal. The clock and the nervous system are running on different scales. After approximately 8 to 10 minutes, and the exact threshold varies between individuals, but the pattern is remarkably consistent across multiple studies, something shifts. The default mode network does not shut off, but its activity changes character. The frantic self-referential chatter slows. The rumination loses its urgency. A different quality of thought begins to emerge, less linear, more associative. Connections between ideas that do not normally share space start to surface. Creative insights. Unexpected memories that carry emotional information relevant to a current problem. Solutions to questions that had resisted every form of direct analysis. This is not meditation mysticism. It is the brain switching from focused, goal-directed processing, which is narrow, efficient, and sequential, to a broader, more diffuse mode that permits novel combinations. The same mode that activates during daydreaming, during long, aimless walks, during showers. The reason people report their best ideas in the shower is not the water. It is the absence of directed attention. The shower is one of the last remaining contexts in modern life where nothing is being consumed, produced, or optimized. And in that nothing, the brain does a specific kind of work that busyness prevents. Silence does the same thing, but with more room and potentially more depth. In 2013, Imke Kirsta at Duke University was running a study on how different auditory environments affect the brains of mice. The experimental conditions included white noise, pup calls, Mozart, and Grega as a control condition, B 2 hours of daily silence. The control was expected to produce no significant neural effect. It was the baseline against which everything else would be measured. Instead, Kirsta found something the team had not anticipated. Mice exposed to 2 hours of silence per day developed significantly more new cells in the hippocampus, the brain region most closely associated with memory formation and spatial orientation, than any of the auditory conditions, including the music. And the new cells were not transient. They appeared to differentiate into functioning neurons and integrate into existing hippocampal circuits. The nothing was doing something. The control condition had become the most interesting finding in the study. The caveat is important. This was a mouse study, and extrapolating directly to human cognition requires caution. But the finding sits within a broader body of evidence suggesting that cognitive rest, genuine downtime where the brain is not processing external stimulation, serves functions that active engagement does not. Memory consolidation, emotional processing, the slow integration of scattered information into coherent personal narratives. These processes appear to require not just sleep, but waking periods of reduced input. Silence, in this framework, is not nothing happening. It is the environmental condition under which a specific category of cognitive work can occur, work that is suppressed, not enhanced, by the constant presence of stimulation. And this reframes the entire concept of silence as it is typically presented. The wellness industry treats silence as a destination, the goal of meditation, the reward at the end of the practice, the inner peace promised on the app. But the neuroscience suggests something different. Silence is a condition, not the flower, but the soil. And what grows in that soil is not, at least initially, peace. What grows is awareness. Awareness of what has been buried underneath the noise, the unresolved conversation, the decision that has been deferred, the emotion that was set aside because there was always something more immediate to attend to. Silence brings these to the surface, and that is precisely why it feels threatening. Not because the room is empty, because the room is full of everything that was avoided while the music was playing. There is a practical dimension here, and it is simpler than most people expect. Research on contemplative practice suggests that the capacity for silence is trainable. Like any cognitive skill, it improves with regular use and atrophies with neglect. The protocol does not require a meditation cushion, an app with a monthly subscription, or a retreat in the mountains. It requires a room, 5 minutes, and the phone in a different room, not face down on the desk, not in a pocket on silent. In a physically different location, behind a closed door. The first 2 minutes will be uncomfortable. That discomfort is the recalibration. It is the signal that something is shifting, not that something is wrong. The task during those 5 minutes is not to think about nothing. That instruction is neurologically incoherent because the default mode network will produce thought regardless of what the conscious mind intends. The task is to let the thinking happen without chasing any particular thread, without solving, without planning, without narrating. Just the weather of the mind, passing through, observed from a slight distance. After 5 minutes, stop. That is the practice. Not 20 minutes, not an hour. 5 minutes of genuine quiet, once a day, with no input and no agenda. The consistency matters more than the duration. A brain that encounters 5 minutes of silence every day is a materially different instrument from one that never does, in the same way that a body that walks for 20 minutes every day is different from one that never leaves the chair. And this is where something counterintuitive emerges. Most people resist the practice not because it is hard. 5 minutes is not hard, but because of what surfaces during those 5 minutes. The thought that has been circling for weeks, the feeling that was supposed to have been processed but was not, the question about work or a relationship or the direction of a life that has been successfully postponed by a perfectly curated rotation of podcasts, playlists, and scrolling. Silence does not create these thoughts. It reveals them. And the revelation can be unwelcome because responding to a thought that has surfaced requires something that avoidance does not, a decision about what to do with it. That is the real question about silence. Not whether it is good for the brain. The evidence on that is clear enough. Not whether it improves creativity or memory or emotional processing. The data points in a consistent direction. The real question is whether the willingness to sit in it exists, and if it does not, what that reluctance honestly says. Not as judgment, not as a character assessment, as information. The quiet kind. The kind that only arrives when everything else stops. 3 weeks of tools, decisions, uncomfortable truths, and now, quiet. Next week, we close out the month, and we begin with one of the most foundational assumptions in the entire self-improvement space. The idea that things always get worse before they get better. What if that is not universally true? What if sometimes worse is simply worse, and recognizing the difference between a transformational crisis and a destructive one is the most important distinction nobody teaches. Tuesday. It might be the hardest conversation yet.